You say narcotics?
Well, drugs, you know,
sure.
like sertraline or...
Can you say the question again?
Sure. Prescriptions. When a person is prescribed prescriptions, it is well within reason that a competent physician would, number one, take a simple blood test, right?
It's possible.
Okay. And I guess that's up to the doctor that you're seeing, right?
Well, sure, or depends on what concerns a person may have, what's their medical history, what's your awareness of other factors that are affecting their biological health.
So let's take Lindsay Clancy.
Depends on which medication we're talking about also.
Let's take Lindsay Clancy, for example, sir. The medical records that you reviewed when she's dealing with Tufts and Gelada, did they administer any blood test to her at all?
Not that I recall.
Is there a further analysis that can be performed on the blood that is drawn from the woman when she sees the doctor to determine whether or not there are enzyme reactions to the prescription drugs that they're prescribed?
There are tests that can be done to determine the relative degree of one enzyme or another and how much they would do in terms of breaking down the medications, if that's what you're talking about.
Well, that test wasn't administered to Lindsay, was it?
I don't think so.
In spite of numerous, innumerable, which we won't have to go through, complaints that she had and her husband about what was happening to her as a result of her postpartum as well as postpartum depression, symptomology of postpartum psychosis in conjunction with the narcotics, the drugs, the prescriptions that she was given. They never did any further testing, right?
Correct.
How about thyroid? Is that something that's important to you as a doctor dealing with a postpartum depression or postpartum psychosis?
Thyroid would be important to assess in a person complaining of mood problems, yes.
Well, how about a woman who is complaining that during the postpartum, which goes on ad infinitum, is complaining of postpartum depression symptoms and or postpartum psychosis? It's important to check their thyroid level, isn't it?
It would be important to check thyroid in multiple different psychiatric conditions.
So the answer is yes, right? The answer is yes.
Well, I'm not sure that specifically answers your question.
I don't care. Thank you. That's all I have, Judge.
Okay. Commonwealth redirect.
Good morning, Dr. Mack. Now, defense counsel kept referring to your investigation in this case. Do you see your role as an investigator when you're retained to do these evaluations?
No.
And in fact, you are evaluating for a specific question, correct?
That's correct.
And in your evaluation in this case, you were asked to focus on the mental condition of Lindsay Clancy at the time of January 24, 2023, right?
So, excuse me, he's able to answer yes or no, but this is direct, so I'm objecting to the leading.
I'm going to allow just to kind of focus to the area, and then we'll go from there. Go ahead, counsel.
Thank you. You can answer that question.
Yes.
Now, were you provided the information that you reviewed?
Yes.
And were you aware where that came from, whether it was the court or the district attorney's office or from defense?
I am not necessarily aware of the origin of any of the documents that I reviewed, only that I did review them and I did possess them.
And as far as the timing of when you were retained in this case, I believe your testimony on Friday was that your memory was early 2025 you were retained. Is that right?
Yes, I would say that the initial discussion about it was at the end of 2024. I'm not exactly sure when the Commonwealth or the District Attorney's Office exactly made the retention happen, but I understand it to be early 2025.
And you were provided a significant amount of information after you were retained, correct?
Yes.
And that information continued to come to you up until the point that you were going to meet with the defendant in April of 2026. Is that fair to say?
That's correct.
And were you able to set up that interview with her on your own?
No.
Is it your understanding that it had to be with the permission of the court and the parties?
That's my understanding.
And that date in April was a date that was provided to you as a date that you could go and speak with her, correct?
Yes, the 2 dates, April 10th and April 12th.
And in conducting these evaluations, is it standard or best practice to review as much information as you can prior to that interview?
That's correct.
And you were provided records from the Tewksbury State Hospital in the weeks prior to your interview. Is that fair to say?
Yes.
Now, when you're retained on cases, this case and any other, you're paid for your time and your work regardless of what your ultimate opinion is, correct?
That's right.
Can you explain to us the relationship that you have with Park Dietz and Associates?
Yes. There are times that attorneys around the country go to Park Dietz and Associates seeking or asking if they have an expert in a particular field, and Park Dietz and Associates may be able to propose one expert or another who might be able to help that attorney or law firm.
And so in your relationship with that company, you are simply an independent contractor, or are you employed by the company?
Independent contractor.
And fair to say, there's not kind of a group email that somebody can send out asking for experts on all these types of areas in which you testify, right?
No. The Park Dietz and Associates would go to individual experts that they think might be appropriate for one or another case given the topic.
Now, you were asked some questions about Dr. Halbrin, and I think last week on Friday you indicated that you didn't know him prior to working on this case. Is that correct?
Correct. I had never met him.
And so is he a name that was familiar to you in your area of general psychiatry?
I knew that he was another expert that works with the Park Dietz and Associates group, but I had never met him.
And in fact, he's not a general psychiatrist, is he?
I believe he's a psychologist.
Okay. And so your focus is different than his focus, correct?
To some degree, yes.
Now, how did it come about that you and Dr. Halbrin ended up going to Tewksbury at the same time?
Well, my memory is that to the extent that he also had been retained, that there was a need to that there was only going to be one opportunity for an examination by the prosecution. And so rather than create two different sets of interviews for Ms. Clancy, it was better to overlap them and have them happen concurrently.
And in relation to the purpose of the interview with the person being evaluated, the defendant here, was there anything different about your approach and his approach as far as the information you were seeking to gather?
Generally, no. As has been mentioned, he went ahead and did psychological testing on the second day. But other than that, it's still the same topic, the individual's mental health.
And in regards to that particular, those days that you were there, It wasn't just you and Dr. Halburn in the room with the defendant, correct?
That's right.
Who else was in the room?
One person who served as a videographer, well, two individuals who served as videographers.
Do you know who retained the videographer?
I don't.
And you're aware that Ms. Clancy was also on a one-to-one, so was there a staff member from Tewksbury close by, if not in the room?
Close by, but not in the room.
And the person who was conducting the video, they were in the room running the video the whole time?
That's correct.
And fair to say, as it pertained to taking breaks, you and Dr. Halburn offered the defendant multiple opportunities to take a break, correct?
Yes.
And
we made it clear that we could take a break anytime.
And she repeatedly declined a break, right?
I recall that, yes.
Okay. And that would be contained within the video that was running throughout the course of your interaction with her, correct?
Yes.
At this time, Your Honor, I'd like to present as the next exhibit the recorded interview with the experts.
I see counsel at sidebar. There'll be exhibit, yes.
Exhibit 292.
Okay, no objection?
No.
Dr. Mack, on cross-examination, you were asked about the LeBron case that you were involved in. You recall that line of questioning?
I do.
And in that case, you were retained by the state of Florida. Is that right?
Yes, the executive office of the governor.
And you offered an opinion in that case, correct?
Yes.
And was that testimony or by way of a declaration or a report?
It was a report, and then there was a deposition.
And so you were part of a hearing with the court in Florida to determine whether your ultimate opinions could be considered in the case, correct?
I don't think that there was a specific separate hearing as to that point.
Okay.
My recollection is that in the phase of a summary judgment proceeding, that the use of my testimony was discussed in the summary judgment documents from each side.
And then ultimately, your opinion wasn't utilized by the court, right?
If I recall the statement of the court in the document, it was that Dr. Mack is not an expert in this case, or it may have said Dr. Mack is not a qualified expert in this case.
And why was that?
My recollection of the case, which is now almost 15 years ago, was that the information that I was aware of in terms of the rate of substance use in individuals who received TANF was nationwide and was not specific to Florida.
And the issue was a Florida TANF case, right? Having to do with residents in the state of Florida. So as far as the limitations there and your testimony in these types of cases could be nationwide. In that particular case, it was just that you didn't have enough information about the residents in that state, correct?
Well, that was
Okay, if you can answer that, and then go ahead.
my understanding is that that was one of the elements by which the court determined or made the statement that it did.
Okay. And you were offering some opinions about your expertise in the area of addiction during that time period, correct?
Yes.
Okay. Had nothing to do with criminal responsibility.
Correct.
Now, you talked a lot with defense counsel about the DSM, so I don't want to go too far into it, but on Friday, you directed Attorney Reddington to a particular part of the bipolar and related disorder chapter having to do with specifiers. Do you remember that?
Yes.
And you directed him to page 173, which referred to the specifier with peripartum onset. Can you just explain to us first what is a specifier when we're talking about the DSM?
Specifiers are a way in which the DSM allows a diagnostician to highlight certain details of the individual's presentation. But as I was mentioning the other day, psychiatric classification nowadays refers to the larger presenting symptoms that the individual has, and specifiers can be added on. So a person can have a severe mood disorder, and then one can add on the specifier of with postpartum onset, or atypical features, or other specifiers that have been defined.
And so when you were referring to page 173, where it starts the long paragraph about with peripartum onset, is that the portion of the specifier categories for bipolar-related disorders where we're talking about postpartum periods?
Yes, there is a defined way in which a person can add as a diagnosis whether or not there was onset in that particular time frame.
And that's where we find the four-week timeline, correct?
Correct.
And it also talks about different mood episodes, including manic and depressive episodes in that section, right?
That's right.
And that section also talks about the fact that it could present, mood episodes could present with psychotic symptoms and without psychotic symptoms, or psychotic features, I should say. Is that right?
Right. Bipolar disorder is bipolar disorder is a disorder of mood. Abnormal mood is what the diagnostician observes and is aware of. And if there is a way to determine that it's a major depressive episode or a manic episode or a hypomanic episode, that will help to determine if this severe mood condition is bipolar or major depressive disorder.
And so in that regard, the same specifier is also part of the major depressive category, correct? As
right.
a specifier.
As I said, the specifiers provide detail, but they are not the, so to speak, the major element of the diagnosis. The major element of the diagnoses in DSM are the observable major symptoms and signs.
Well, I'm asking about just what's contained within those specifiers, because you and counsel went back and forth quite a bit on Friday about what's in there and what's not in the DSM when it comes to the peripartum onset. But as far as in both the specifier for bipolar and depressive disorder, there are a number of those features that you were discussing that is in the DSM as a specifier.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah.
And those are presentation with psychotic features, the frequency of occurrence or reoccurrence of the peripartum onset for these disorders, right? That's in there.
Yes, the description has that, yes.
As well as the risk of postpartum episodes being greater when people have history of depressive disorders or bipolar disorder. That's within that specifier for each of those two chapters, is it not?
Yes, that portion of the specifier is a description of what's been observed over time. It's not necessarily the criteria, but it's the observations that have been so commonly observed that they were able to write that in the manual.
So this concept of a peripartum onset, or we've been using it as postpartum interchangeably, it's within the DSM-5, right?
Yes, the DSM-5 provides a manner by which to make a diagnosis that provides this specification or highlights this detail of the individual's illness.
And as far as your conclusions, again, when you're asked to do an evaluation, do you rely on other people's conclusions about diagnosis when making your own diagnosis?
It's important to understand what others have observed and what they're concerned about, and then as a physician, one will make one's own diagnosis.
And so in this case, you came to the conclusion that the defendant presented with a major depressive episode, right?
Correct.
And you relied on diagnostic criteria in the major depressive disorder category. Is that fair to say?
Yes, that was the diagnostic criteria that I used to support that diagnosis.
And counsel went through with you today a number of different I think he called them symptoms of postpartum depression. But as far as major depressive disorder, what are the 9 general symptoms that you see, or you can find 5 or more of, to find that somebody suffers from a major depressive disorder?
So a major depressive episode is defined, and this is parallel to the description I was giving earlier of a manic episode. They're both problems of mood. They're both discrete periods of mood problems. So a major depressive episode would be a 2-week discrete change in a person's mood, and you have to have at least 5 of 9 different symptoms or signs, and it has to be persistent, and it has to be most of the days. So the 9 include starting out with anhedonia, meaning lack of feeling pleasure. Secondly, actually feeling depressed mood. It can be feelings of guilt or worthlessness. and then it also may include problems with thinking about death or suicidality. Furthermore, problems with sleep, eating, what we call energy, psychomotor activity, either psychomotor slowing or agitation. And then all these, you have to have 5 out of these 9
Right.
In order to meet the major depressive episode.
And I think maybe you might have missed one, diminished ability to think or concentrate. Is that one?
Concentration.
Concentration.
So
a lot of the symptoms that counsel read to you are symptoms that are in the category of a major depressive disorder. Is that correct?
yes, this is the method of making the diagnosis of a major depressive episode.
So when you were asked on cross-examination about postpartum depression, and you kept answering that you found her to have a depressive disorder, are those the symptoms that you were speaking of when you were saying you found a major depressive disorder?
Can I object?
No overruled.
Leading?
Correct.
No overruled. I'll allow it.
I have nothing further.
Okay.
Thank you.
Anything further?
Just briefly, sir, are you suggesting that my office had any control over when you were able to go visit Lindsay in the hospital?
Objection.
No overruled.
I don't know if your office was involved, but I imagine, so I don't know.
You don't know.
I imagine your office was aware,
Thank you.
but I don't know if you had control.
Doctor, I think you've answered the question. All right. Next. Anything further?
Nothing. Thank you, Judge.
Anything further, Como? All right. Thank you, Doctor. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
All right. So, members of the jury, we're going to take the morning break at this point. And we're going to come back and continue with the Commonwealth's rebuttal case. We'll have a witness who'll go on the stand after we get back. All right. So we'll take the break at this time. Thank you.
Court, all rise. Jury, sign your close the notebook. Face on the chairs, please. This way. Jurors have exited the courtroom.
All right. Anything we need to discuss before the break, Como?
No, Your Honor.
No, thank you.
All right. So we'll be in the morning recess at this time. Thank you.
Thank you.
Court is in recess.
Court is back in session. You may be seated.
Your Honor, for the purpose of the record, we return back to the trial of Commonwealth versus Lindsay Clancy. All parties are present, excluding the jury.
All right. Attorney Sprague, we ready for the jury?
Yes, Your Honor.
All right.
Court, all rise. Jurors entering. This court's now in session. Please be seated.
Your Honor, for the purpose of the record, we return back to the trial of Commonwealth versus Lindsay Clancy. All parties are present, including the defendant and including the 18 jurors.
All right. Thank you, Madam Clerk. Attorney Sprague, you call your next witness?
Thank you, Your Honor. The Commonwealth calls Dr. Kirk Halbern.
Good morning, sir. Good morning. You start right here. Raise your right hand for the clerk, please.
Good morning. Do you solemnly swear that the testimony in the evidence you shall give to the court and the jury in the matter now pending between the Commonwealth and the defendant will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? So help you God.
I do.
Thank you, sir. You can have a seat.
Watch your step, please.
All right. Good morning, Doctor.
Good morning, sir.
All right. I'm going to ask you to keep your voice up so the jury can hear you. And with that, Attorney Sprague.
Thank you, Your Honor. Good afternoon. Can you please state and spell your name for the record?
Yes, my name is Kirk Heilbrun. That's spelled K-I-R-K, and then H-E-I-L-B-R-U-N.
What is your occupation?
I'm a psychologist. I am in the Department of Psychology at Drexel University in Philadelphia. And as part of that, I run 2 clinics. One is a clinic where I conduct psychological evaluations for, thanks, sir, for courts and attorneys, and the other is what we call the Reentry Project, where we provide assessment and treatment services to individuals who are either returning from federal prison or under the jurisdiction of a federal mental health court or have been exonerated following a false conviction.
And do you specialize in certain areas of psychology?
Yes, I do. I'm a forensic psychologist, and that means that I take the application of clinical psychology and I apply it to legal proceedings in criminal and civil matters.
Can you describe your training in clinical psychology?
Yes, I can. I received a doctoral degree from the University of Texas at Austin in 1980. And as part of that, I received training in various sorts of assessment and treatment and therapy and research and things like that. And then also as part of that, I was involved in a full-time internship between 1979 and 1980 at the University of Texas Health Science Center at San Antonio.
And did you receive specialized postgraduate training in forensic psychology?
I did. I received from 1981 to 1982, I did a postdoctoral fellowship in the applications of psychology to crime and criminal justice.
And what did that involve?
That involved full-time exposure to clinical work in correctional and forensic populations, and also a thorough exposure to the clinical and research literature on assessment and interventions with these individuals.
And are you licensed to practice psychology?
I am licensed in the state of Pennsylvania, and I'm also part of something called PsyPact, which allows people licensed in one state to practice on a temporary basis in another state.
And are you board certified in clinical psychology?
I'm board certified with the American Board of Professional Psychology, which is the oldest and most rigorous kind of board certification agency organization in the country.
And are you board certified in forensic psychology?
Yes, I'm also board certified in forensic psychology with the American Board of Professional Psychology.
And do you have experience in the treatment of individuals found either incompetent to stand trial or not guilty due to lack of criminal responsibility?
I do. Between 1982 and 1991, I was first a staff psychologist, then a chief psychologist at the Florida State Hospital in Chattahoochee, Florida. And then between 1991 and 1994, I served as the clinical director of the forensic unit at Central State Hospital in Petersburg, Virginia. And at that time, I was also serving as an associate professor in the Department of Psychiatry at the Medical College of Virginia in Richmond. And as a part of these positions, I had responsibilities for providing assessment and treatment services myself, and also for supervising such services provided by others.
And could you describe your job responsibilities at Drexel University?
I could. I teach graduate and undergraduate courses in forensic assessment and law and psychology. And as part of the clinic that I mentioned a moment ago, I conduct forensic evaluations at the request of judges and attorneys, and I supervise individuals who are providing services to the individuals who are either coming back to the community from prison or under the jurisdiction of a federal mental health court, or who are leaving prison having been exonerated following a false conviction. And finally, I conduct research and supervise students who are working in psychology and law areas.
And have you conducted research in the areas of abnormal behavior and criminality?
I have. Over the course of my career, I've published about 240 articles, chapters, and books in the areas of aggression and violence, juveniles, mentally disordered adult offenders, forensic assessment, ethics, and malingering and deception. And two of those interests that are particularly applicable to the present case are risk assessment, which helps us understand the influences contributing to violent behavior, and also forensic mental health assessment, where we consider the important principles and steps that are connected with psychological and psychiatric evaluations in legal contexts such as criminal or civil proceedings.
And are you involved in providing continuing education to mental health and legal professionals?
Yes, over the past 15 years, I've presented about 50 lectures and workshops in the areas of forensic assessment, risk assessment, treatment, sexual offenders, and ethics.
And Doctor, in your experience in doing forensic evaluations and in teaching people how to do forensic evaluations, would you call someone you're doing a forensic evaluation on your patient?
No, I would call them perhaps someone who's being evaluated or an evaluee or something like that. They're not a patient because the role of therapist in treating a patient is different from the role of a psychologist or psychiatrist in conducting a forensic mental health assessment. They're different in a number of different ways, but basically what we try to do as a forensic evaluator is we try our best to conduct a thorough evaluation in which we are out there and trying our best to be accurate and just come up with something that is as true and accurate as we can possibly make it in terms of evaluating the questions that were asked. When we're working as a therapist, basically we're working to help somebody improve in their in various kinds of difficulties that they're having in life, symptoms, problems, and that sort of thing. And the two can conflict sometimes because as a therapist, I just want to do my best to help somebody. As a forensic evaluator, I want to do my best to be as accurate and open and thorough as possible, even if it doesn't necessarily help someone.
And seeing as you've treated patients and you've conducted forensic evaluations, would you conduct a forensic evaluation on one of your patients if requested?
I would not, no. If I were asked to do that, I would explain that those are two different roles, that there is very likely a conflict of interest that could arise if I try to do both, and I would refer whoever requested it to another individual to conduct the evaluation.
And have you testified in cases as a witness on issues like competence to stand trial, criminal responsibility at the time of an offense, civil commitment, and other areas?
I have. Over the course of my career, I've testified about 330 times. With adults and juveniles, the issues have included things like transfer and sentencing, competence to stand trial, mental state at the time of the offense, civil commitment, and personal injury. I've testified on behalf of both the defense and the prosecution, and I've been qualified as an expert in juvenile criminal and civil litigation in both state and federal court. And I estimate that over the course of my career, I have conducted about 75% of the time I've conducted an evaluation and testified on behalf of the defense. And the remaining 25% have been conducted and testified on behalf of the prosecution or by order of the court.
And have there been times in that 25% of your casework that you've been retained by the prosecution, say for a criminal responsibility evaluation, where you find that the defendant is not criminally responsible and you have to tell the prosecutor that?
Yes, that happens with the prosecutor, and it also happens with the defense. And it's just something that we have to be able to do if we're in the profession of forensic psychology, because if we try to be thorough and accurate and impartial, then sometimes the results will favor whoever asks us to conduct the evaluation, and sometimes they won't. And what they have to hear, if my findings don't favor them, is that they're probably not going to want to use it.
And is there something called retention bias?
There is. That's something that's been discussed, particularly in the last 10 or 15 years. And there are a number of different kinds of biases that the field has paid particular attention to, potentially, over the last 20 years or so. And retention bias is the bias that is a part of what we can experience when we want to or inclined to favor the side that asks us to conduct the evaluation. And that's an important consideration. And I'm aware of it, and I try to guard against it as much as possible by talking with others, getting multiple sources of information, and a variety of other ways of doing that.
So when you conduct a forensic evaluation, you're actively guarding against having that retention bias?
Yes.
Now, have you specialized in any particular diagnosis or type of offense or legal question?
I have not specialized in that way. Most of my forensic evaluation experience has been with criminal and juvenile matters, and they have often included alleged crimes of violence, but I haven't specialized in any particular kind of mental or emotional disorder, any particular kind of crime, anything like that.
And when you say criminal and juvenile matters, are you referring to adults as the criminal portion and juveniles as juvenile?
I am, yes.
Okay. And do you find that there's a benefit to not focusing in on a particular illness or diagnosis or type of offense?
Yes, I do. Among the biases I talked about a minute ago, there's something called confirmation bias. And basically that's if you make up your mind earlier or incline toward one particular diagnosis or anything like that, then there can be a real problem, because when you get conflicting information, that is information that's not consistent with that decision that you've made or leaned toward early on, then the problem becomes you pay attention to the information that's consistent with it and you stay away from the information that isn't. And so in some ways, for me, not specializing gives me an advantage, because what I can do is come in and not be inclined toward any particular diagnosis or possible answer to a particular set of questions or a particular hypothesis or anything like that. What I can do is do my best to look at the different possibilities, and when there's evidence favoring one or supporting one, I'm inclined toward that. And when there's not, then I set it aside.
And have you had leadership experience in your field?
I have, yes. I served as the chair of my department at Drexel for 15 years, and I've also served as the president of two national organizations, the two that are most strongly associated with forensic psychology in this country. One is the American Psychology Law Society, and the other is the American Board of Forensic Psychology.
Your Honor, I'd move to submit Dr. Halbern's CV as the next exhibit.
That may be admitted.
Doctor, were you asked to conduct a forensic evaluation of Lindsay Clancy?
I was, yes.
And what did that entail, that forensic evaluation?
One of the things it entailed is doing my best to review a lot of information, to meet with Ms. Clancy in an interview, to speak with her in particular about what happened around the time of the alleged offense, to conduct collateral interviews with other individuals and review a wide range of documents. And so I have been reviewing documents since January of 2025. I had the opportunity to meet with Ms. Clancy in April of this year, 2026, and at that time spent 3 days with her along with Dr. Avram Mack. One of those days, which was video recorded, we talked about her background and a lot of information like that. The second day, where I met with her myself and did not video that because some of these psychological tests are private and they should not be videoed. So we did some psychological testing during that second day, and then on the third day, back with the video, back with Dr. Mack, we talked with Ms. Clancy about the things that she was thinking and feeling and doing around the time of the alleged offense. And so I mentioned that I reviewed records. I've got a report sitting in front of me, and those records are spelled out over 4 pages, so I'm not going to run through the whole list with you. But those records did include things like cell phone records, the defense expert forensic psychiatric evaluation reports by Dr. Resnick and Dr. Spinelli, some Department of Children and Family records, digital forensic records, including texts and information that was provided by the watch that she wore, the Apple Watch, and the phone, variety of medical records, police investigative records, police interviews with many people, and grand jury proceedings, as well as surveillance footage of the Clancy family going to various places, Museum of Science visit, Cape Cod, CVs, that sort of thing.
And in total, all the time that you took to review these documents, look at the evidence, interview and test Ms. Clancy, approximately how much time have you spent on this case?
About 180 hours prior to coming to Plymouth. So most of that was spent in reviewing records. About 10 and a half hours was spent in meeting with Ms. Clancy and doing the testing. And then another hour and a half was spent in collateral interviews.
And who did you interview in collateral interviews?
I interviewed her former husband, Patrick Clancy, and his mother, Ms. Clancy's mother-in-law, Sue Clancy. And
did you also request to interview Ms. Clancy's mother and sister?
Not her mother. I did request to interview her sister, and I think she decided against that.
Now, you mentioned that when you interviewed Ms. Clancy on the first and third days, you were with Dr. Mack, correct?
Correct.
Why is it that you two were interviewing Ms. Clancy together on those days?
Well, that's something that I do sometimes, conduct a joint interview. That's done in training contexts, for example, a fair amount. And in this case, many of the questions that we were going to ask her, a large number of the questions that we're going to ask her about her background and her history were going to be similar. So we were able to conduct those, ask those questions in a way and save some time, keep her from having to go through and ask and answer them twice. Then the third day, again, many of the questions that we were going to ask had to do with her thinking, feeling, and behavior leading up to the time of January 24th. And basically, it involves kind of a step-by-step process, going very slowly, getting a lot of detail. And we expected that many of those questions, sort of step-by-step detail, were going to be things that we would be able to work on, or they were going to be things that we could ask twice, or we could ask once and see it on the video.
And in terms of your interviewing Ms. Clancy together, after that was done, did the two of you come up with a joint opinion on a diagnosis?
We did not, no. Although we were interviewing her together on 2 days, we took that information and we each independently came up with our own report, our own review of that information, our own analysis of what it meant, and so on. So, no, we wrote separate reports. We actually did not agree on the diagnosis.
Now, if we could have the PowerPoint. In terms of your evaluation of Ms. Clancy, including the records and the collateral interviews and your interviews of her, did you form some main conclusions?
I did, yes.
And if you could tell us, what were your major findings regarding Ms. Clancy's mental health history before September of 2022?
She had a fairly limited mental health history before September 2022. She did experience some anxiety related to achievement, She's a very strong student in school, and she got straight A's, basically. She experienced some anxiety while in nursing school doing case presentations because you have to stand up in front of a group, and that made her kind of anxious. And then she had some anxiety connected with her 3 pregnancies, some in the beginning about the ultrasounds and so on, and some sort of as she was returning to work. So after each child, she'd have some time off with a child, and then after several months she would return to work. And on each of those occasions, with Cora and Dawson and Callan, she had some anxiety because she didn't like to leave her children. That was an important consideration for her, whether it was dropping them off at school or returning to work or leaving them with a babysitter or going out with friends, going out on date night. She didn't like to leave them. And so those were some of the things that were connected with her mental health history before September of 2022. And this was in the context of her growing up as a highly achieving individual, getting very strong grades, competing in sports and competitive cheerleading. These are all things that the anxiety probably pushed her a little bit more in the direction of doing this very well, because she was a very hardworking and highly self-disciplined individual. She also grew up in a family that was close and comfortable, and had a number of friends that she spent time with, both as a girl and a teenager and so on. But she was very highly achieving, and I think one of the important aspects of her mental health history before September of 2022 is that she really did not experience anxiety in a way that interfered very much with her functioning. She had a little bit of she had about 6 months worth of treatment for the anxiety connected with the nursing school. But it was not something that interfered with her life very much prior to September of 2022.
And doctor, did you also learn that growing up as a child, she didn't experience any type of abuse, witness any domestic violence, have any sort of trauma or anything like that as she was growing up?
Yes, one of the psychological tests, which I'll talk about a little bit later, is called the Adverse Childhood Experiences measure, and that's something that asks an individual whether they went through what we would call adverse experiences or traumatic experiences as a child and an adolescent. And there are 10 of them, and if you have 4 or more of them, that puts you at higher risk for different kinds of adverse outcomes as an adult. She did not endorse any of those. So on the ACEs questionnaire, she had a 0, which really goes to the question that you ask of whether she had adverse or traumatic experiences as a child.
And so she did not, correct? She did not report any.
She did not report any, and there were any number of individuals who were asked similar questions about her childhood and her adolescence, and they all said basically no, she did not.
And then can you tell us about your major findings for the mental health history beginning in September 2022?
Yes, I can. So it was about 12 weeks after her son Callan was born, and she was feeling very anxious and sometimes depressed about having to leave him when he went back to work. There were 2 reasons for that. One is that she had felt anxious about leaving her children on a number of occasions and with the previous kids. But the second reason was she was breastfeeding and Callan was not taking the bottle. And so she was worried if she went back to work. She worked as a labor and delivery nurse on the night shifts. And she was worried that if she left Callan home and he woke up in the night and wouldn't take the bottle, there would be a problem. And so that was what got her particularly anxious. And what happened was she searched for a psychiatrist, found one, Dr. Jennifer Tufts, in September, and went to Dr. Tufts and got a prescription for Zoloft she wanted to reduce her anxiety somewhat. And she didn't begin taking it immediately. She was a little bit worried about the impact that it might have on the breast milk. But sometime in October, she began taking the Zoloft. And things started getting very difficult at that point.
And doctor, did you learn how things became difficult from the records in your interview of her?
I did, both of those, and from, I guess you could say the records, because a number of people had talked about that, including her husband, Patrick, and I also got some of that information from him as well during the collateral interview.
And what did you learn?
What was happening toward the end of his 12-week paternity leave is that she was getting more anxious when she started in mid-October taking the Zoloft. She immediately began to have some difficulty. The anxiety did not get better. In fact, it got worse. There were some symptoms of depression. She immediately started having some really difficult insomnia. And felt a lot of stress and so on. And so in October and moving into November, she had hoped to return to work and planned to return to work, but it was not going to work out for her because her symptoms were really difficult. So in the middle of November, she texted her mother-in-law, Sue Clancy, who was at work, also a nurse, and she was in the emergency room at South Shore Hospital. She felt unwell. She was having problems sleeping. She had a racing heart. She had lost some of her appetite. Continuing into November, she was struggling with anxiety, severe insomnia, palpitations. She was just having a lot of difficulty with the thought of leaving the baby, racing thoughts, feeling overwhelmed, and things like that. So moving further into November, into late November, she was just having real difficulty with sleep disruption, and she had concerns all along, starting in mid-October, about the impact of the medications. It was her thought that the medications were giving her some of these adverse reactions because it was really difficult for her to look at this and say, I wanted to get some improvement in the anxiety, and I did not. Instead, it got worse. And so late in November, she was still having a lot of trouble sleeping. She thought that she was close to what she called the end of her rope. She was feeling off and disconnected and sort of like a zombie, and she began to report panic symptoms, concerns about being addicted or dependent on the benzodiazepines, some kind of disoriented and forgetful and disconnected from her body. So she was having a lot of difficulty with what she thought were the medication that was resulting in this kind of impact. And then into December, it was not getting better.
And sir, if I could just interrupt you.
Yes.
On your PowerPoint here, are we still on number 3 here, or have we moved on?
I don't know as he finished his answer.
Why don't you come in focus?
Are we still on number 3, or have we moved on?
We're still on number 2,
okay.
but I'm also slipping in a little bit of number 3 as I answer number 2.
Okay. And if you could please continue describing what was happening in December of 2022.
Yes. Around this time, late November, early December, she began to experience what she called horrible, intrusive thoughts. And those thoughts were about harming herself, potentially. And as she continued to experience these kinds of thoughts later into December and January, they would occasionally be about harming the children. But for the most part, particularly early on, these were thoughts about possible suicide and harming herself. And the way she described it is these thoughts would just pop into my head, and they included things like, your brain is damaged, you need to kill yourself. Now, the way she described these is they were not auditory hallucinations. Instead, they were her own thoughts. They were intrusive and unwelcome, but they were not auditory hallucinations. And that's important because if she had been hearing a voice like you're hearing my voice right now, it comes from outside of your head. And that's a different kind of a symptom than having thoughts, even unwelcome and intrusive thoughts that are in your head. If it's coming from outside, that is very likely a psychotic symptom. And if it's a psychotic symptom, then that has different implications for what's wrong with you, as opposed to something that is unwelcome and intrusive, but inside your own head.
And doctor, the way she described these thoughts that she was having in December about harming herself, in the medical records and in her conversations with you, she described those as unwelcome but internal thoughts, correct?
Yes, that's right. It was important because of what I just said that I asked her the question, when you were experiencing these thoughts, were they like your own thoughts or were they like auditory hallucinations? And she said they were like my own thoughts. And she made it clear that they were unwelcome and intrusive, but they were like my own thoughts. And she didn't get to talking about experiencing auditory hallucinations, as I will talk about a little bit later, until January 24th. And so she continued to have real difficulty with various kinds of problems. She had lost about 15 pounds, not intending to. She was having tremors and sweating and GI symptoms and sadness, severe depression, that sort of thing, as she described it. Feeling numb and zombie-like were her words, again in December. And then by middle December, it was getting very difficult for her as she talked about it. Her sleep was getting a little bit better, but she was continuing to have significant symptoms of depression, things like hopelessness and the loss of capacity for pleasure and things like that. She described her experience on December 15th of 2022 as one of her worst days. She went to, her husband took her to Mass General that day, and she did not stay very long, but it was one of those things that was really difficult. The symptoms were, as she saw it, pretty bad. And then on December 20th, she went to a hospital called Women and Infants in Rhode Island, and they had a day program for postpartum individuals having difficulties. And they said that they weren't going to take her, that she didn't meet their criteria for the postpartum program. Generally, that was because they said that she looked like she was having general anxiety symptoms and depressive disorders, but not so much the postpartum necessarily. And
doctor, if I could just stop you
No,
Yes.
You finished with that description of what information you got from that provider?
Not quite, Judge, but almost.
Okay.
I apologize.
Yes.
You can finish.
So she was not going to remain in women and infants, and the next step that she took was hospitalization at McLean.
And so if I could ask you a follow-up question now, before we
Yes.
go on to McLean,
Yes.
about women and infants. Were you able to review the women and infants records?
I was, yes.
And looking at the women and infants records, on page 9 I have here, it states that patient was offered several options for her, including inpatient treatment for medication management, a partial hospital program focused on general mental health, or continued outpatient management. Patient plans to follow up with her outpatient provider for guidance. So even though they said she didn't necessarily fit into their postpartum program, they did offer her 3 other programs, correct?
They did, yes.
And her response, Ms. Clancy's response, was that she was going to discuss that with her provider for guidance, correct?
Yes.
And in reviewing the records of Dr. Tufts and Rebecca Gelada, did you ever see any mention of the defendant actually following through with that and discussing with them those 3 options that were offered by women and infants?
No, what I saw is that they were back to being treated according to the plan and the medication and so on. But she was back to being treated, discussing with Dr. Tufts what the best implications were for treatment.
Okay. And then you were about to talk about what happened at McLean. So if you could please tell us what you learned about McLean and how that was impactful to your analysis or your evaluation.
Yes. She was admitted to McLean on January 1st of 2023. And what got her there was suicidal thinking. That was very difficult for her. That was a very difficult time to experience that sort of thing. And so she went into McLean on January 1st, and their admission documentation listed postpartum depression and major depressive disorder, which they described as recurrent and mild. While she was in McLean, what she reported as her primary concern was insomnia. And she said that while she was hospitalized, it actually made her more anxious than being at home. And when she was asked about the suicidal impulses and thoughts, she said that she would not commit suicide because of her children and her mother. So she had they asked about reasons for living, among other things, and those were some of the ones that she cited.
Doctor, would that be called a protective factor?
Yes, sometimes it's called a protective factor.
And that's something that protects you or prevents you from committing suicide?
Yes, would keep you from doing something like that.
And then what were your further findings?
So she stayed at McLean for 5 days, and she was documented as not having safety concerns and at minimal risk for returning to the community by January 3rd. She described her mood there as numb, but she denied things like delusions or hallucinations or suicidal thoughts that were continuing or homicidal thinking. And at the time she was discharged on the 5th of January, she was described as cooperative and pleasant, with no psychosis, no suicidal or homicidal thinking. And she said, when I was asking her about it, that when she left McLean, she had what she described as a small shred of hope after discharge, because she was off of medication, Seroquel, which she thought was causing her a lot of trouble. But the intrusive suicidal thoughts returned, she said, within a week or so following her discharge from McLean.
And would we be moving on now to number 3 on your PowerPoint?
Yes, we are.
Symptoms following the beginning of medication. So what were your major findings in that area?
Well, I have, I think I've combined 2 and 3 as I've talked about this, because one of the things about this is after she started taking the medication in October, the Zoloft, she had, the anxiety didn't get better. She had great difficulty with insomnia. And she said she was numb. She felt like a zombie. It wasn't something that she was able to see any improvement in. In fact, she thought it was getting a lot worse. And so basically, what she thought is that the symptoms that she was experiencing following taking the medication that was prescribed beginning in October, she said the symptoms were getting worse, particularly a new symptom, which was insomnia.
We could move on to the next slide. Doctor, and does that bring us to number 4 on your PowerPoint, the adverse response to medications, including bad insomnia?
Yes, and I won't take nearly as long in talking about that, because one of the things that she thought was happening when she began taking that medication in October is that the medication itself was far from making the anxiety better. It was making it worse and keeping her from sleeping, and it was, she thought, making it difficult for her to she thought that the medication was actually making it a real problem for her to sleep, to feel. She felt emotionally numb and that sort of thing. And so accompanying the bad insomnia with the apparent adverse responses, producing the insomnia and other things, was a real problem for her as she saw it. And it's one of the things that she continued to emphasize to providers, whether it was Dr. Tufts or Ms. Gelada, a nurse practitioner. She said, basically, I think these medications are making me worse. But one of the things, moving on to number 5 there, one of the things she also said is that she was focusing on making the anxiety, helping the anxiety get better through medication. There was a little bit of counseling going on with Ms. Gelada, but one of the things that she did not really have was, say, a cognitive behavioral therapist or something like that to help her work through the problems. She thought that medication was going to try to help, and it really did. It was something that she focused on a good deal.
And when you say she was focused, the defendant was focused on medication resolving her problems, would that include talking to doctors about different medications to try, researching medications on her own, asking friends and family for tips on medications, things like that?
Yes, all of those things.
Okay. And then should we move on to number 6, the mixed evidence about diagnosis and the nature of her problems?
Yes.
And what were your major findings in that area?
Over the course of the time that she was going through these experiences between mid-October and late January, she'd had a lot of providers offer a lot of diagnoses. and there were a lot of complicating considerations. So among some of the diagnoses that she'd been given were adjustment disorder with anxiety and depression, generalized anxiety disorder, major depressive disorder, bipolar disorder 2, postpartum depression, postpartum psychosis, post-traumatic stress disorder. That last one was not before January of 2023, but it's something that she has right now. And in addition to those diagnoses, which sort of implies that she has a disorder and she has symptoms, there were complicating factors. She had psychotropic medication with apparent adverse reaction. She had serious sleep deprivation over a 3-month period. She had between 5 and 8 months after the birth of her third child. She had anxiety about returning to work in the fall of 22. She was worried about leaving her baby for work, and he was not taking the bottle. And the other thing, which was important for her, is she was always someone who was, she was into exercise. And she stopped exercising sometime in October when she started having these adverse reactions. But it's one of these things that it was a real difficult thing for her to handle when she couldn't do the running or the yoga or the Peloton or other things that she used to keep her anxiety managed.
Were you aware that she was able to return to exercising on several dates in December and in January, going to the Kingsbury Club where she was a member?
Yes, she was trying that, yes.
Yeah. And is that something that, as putting on your clinician hat for a moment, is that something that you would recommend to a patient that they, in this situation, that they try to do things like exercise to complement medication and therapy?
Well, if it works, it does work for some people, and they use it effectively over the course of their lives, particularly if they have some anxiety that might not fully need treatment, but it's something that might interfere with your life a little bit.
And what were your next observations?
Well, if we could move on to the next slide, please.
So here we have number 7, your diagnosis, bipolar 2 disorder. So was that your diagnosis of Ms. Clancy?
It was, and it was hard because of all the diagnoses in the records and all the symptoms that she experienced and so on. To make a diagnosis of bipolar disorder or bipolar 2 disorder, which is a kind of a less serious way of experiencing bipolar disorder, you have to have identifiable mood swings, and one is a period of depression, which she certainly had, but a period of depression, and that was something that made a big difference over a certain period of time in depressed symptoms and sadness and not having much or not having much motivation and things like that. But you also, for a bipolar diagnosis, need something where you have an identifiable period where the mood is much greater. It's much, one of the things that I might say is that one feels during a manic period sort of high, jumpy, decreased need for sleep, racing thoughts, sort of flight of ideas, thinking really fast, excessive appetites for different kinds of things, not getting tired, feeling important and powerful, and things like that. And I was having a hard time finding something that looked like it was a manic episode. There were times when she felt, as she described it after the birth of different children, she felt good, she felt on top of the world, she felt really close to them, to her husband and her kids, and so on. But it's also something that it didn't look like a manic episode so much as it looked like she was really feeling good and getting back into exercise and things like that. So it's one of those considerations where the thing that sort of gave me pause for a while in diagnosing a bipolar disorder is that I didn't see that manic episode. But what really convinced me is that she's been at Tewksbury now for more than 3.5 years. And the diagnosis of record at Tewksbury is bipolar disorder. And they are, as I read the records, very careful about what they prescribe and how much, and various other kinds of considerations. And one of the things that the records reflect is that when she was on some medication that's prescribed to help stabilize her mood, and it was discontinued for medical reasons, she had a kind of immediate response to that, which is to say, she noticed it, and that's a consideration as well. So I ended up with making a diagnosis of bipolar II disorder, which is a slightly less, not slightly, it's a less severe form of bipolar disorder.
And doctor, why did you diagnose with bipolar II and not bipolar?
Because bipolar, as I said, is a more severe kind of diagnosis. It's more noticeable, and if you had a bipolar diagnosis, then I would want to see something that clearly and definitely looks like a manic episode. And I did not see any evidence of that before January 24th of 2023.
And there were some incidents that have been described by witnesses who have testified and in the medical records, things like the defendant cleaning out her garage with her husband at one point in time. Was that something that you did or did not see as manic, and why?
Well, there was some indication in the records that some people thought it was manic. I did not see it that way. She did not describe, when I asked her, she did not describe that as a manic episode. She didn't think it was. And when I talked to Patrick Clancy, he said he didn't think it was either. And basically it was cleaning out the garage and getting a lot of stuff into 20 trash bags and so on. But one of the things he said is, they were both working hard, but it wasn't all her out there putting stuff in 20 trash bags, and he wasn't a part of it. He said he was definitely a part of it.
And would it be accurate that bipolar disorder requires that period of mania for, I believe it's 7 days, where bipolar II requires hypomania for 4 days? Is that right?
Yes, that's right.
Okay. And so did you see signs of hypomania?
Well, that's something where it's less clear that it's manic, and that's one of the things that inclined me toward bipolar II is I just did not see signs that were clearly manic episodes, but it looked like something that it possibly could have been a less serious or less severe manic episode.
And in terms of this diagnosis, this bipolar II, is there a way to determine whether she always had this disorder or if it's something new, and if it's something new, when it appeared?
It's a disorder that typically comes on in adulthood. It's not something that you have as a kid or even for the most part as an adolescent. It's something that you start to show the signs of when you are in your 20s or 30s.
Okay. And so at this point, would it be time to move on to number 8 on your PowerPoint?
Yes.
Which would be criminal responsibility evaluation, so mental state and legal standard are relevant. So what were your findings on number 8?
Well, one of the things that I wanted to say about number 8 is that I wasn't called up here just to make a diagnosis or talk about symptoms. This is a criminal responsibility evaluation. And one of the things that I take a look at very carefully when I'm doing something like this is what's the standard for criminal responsibility in the jurisdiction. Now, I'm aware that the court will instruct the jury about the standard and how you apply it and so on, but my understanding of the standard for criminal responsibility in Massachusetts is that a person is not criminally responsible if, at the time of the offense, they suffered from a mental disease or defect, and, as a result, lacked substantial capacity either to appreciate the criminality or wrongfulness of their conduct or to conform their conduct to the requirements of the law. So there were really three parts. There really are three parts to that criminal responsibility standard. The first is mental disease or defect, and that's one of the reasons why I've paid so much attention to the symptoms and when they began and things like that. But the other thing that I try to do is take those symptoms and see how they affect somebody, in this case Ms. Clancy's, capacity for knowing that something like this was illegal or wrong, or how they affected her capacity for conforming her conduct to the requirements of the law, which I think of as kind of controlling her behavior. And
to determine, is that something that those three elements are those things that you kept in mind throughout your evaluation of the records and your interview of the defendant and the psychological testing that you did?
It is, yes, and it's something that I put on page 1 of my report because I always try to do that to try to make it as clear as I can that this is something I'm paying attention to throughout the entire evaluation.
So that's your mindset when approaching the evaluation of Ms. Clancy?
It is, yes.
Okay. And so what types of psychological testing did you do with Ms. Clancy?
There were several reasons why I wanted to do psychological testing. One is what we call response style. In a matter like this, somebody like Ms. Clancy during an interview could respond what we call reliably, which is within the limits of her memory, as accurately as she possibly can. But there are other response styles. One is that somebody could do what we call exaggeration or even fabrication. Sometimes that's called malingering, which is they distort or they take the kind of report that they do and they exaggerate or even fabricate the severity of what they are experiencing. And then the other kind of response style is to underreport, basically to say, I'm going to minimize or even deny things that I actually experience. So response style is always important in doing a forensic evaluation like this, and I paid attention to it. And one of the psychological tests that I administered, something called the Minnesota Multiphasic Personality Inventory, has scales that allow me to look and say, is she being kind of reliable, or is she exaggerating or fabricating, or is she minimizing or denying? So that was one of the reasons that I wanted to do these tests. The second is I wanted to pay attention to possible symptoms of what we call severe mental illness, things like hallucinations or delusions or mental disorganization. They can't really kind of focus on what's being discussed so much as you tend to get off track or have tangential speech, which is kind of running off the topic and going to different ways and so on. Cognitive disorganization is another speech. There's also review of her reported symptoms around January 24th of 2023, and I wanted to ask her questions in a fairly comprehensive way about that. There are other symptoms that she was experiencing reportedly, depression in particular, and I wanted to know how depressed she was feeling. And so that was something that I could also measure with these psychological tests. And then finally, suicidal thinking was quite important. and I wanted to ask her questions about her thinking and feeling and behavior related to suicide, kind of leading up to January 24th and then around that time. So these are all reasons why I gave her psychological tests.
Could I have you pause there for a moment?
Yes.
I'm not sure if it's a good time to break.
It's a good time to break. All right. Why don't we do that? Thank you. All right. So members of the jury, we're going to take the afternoon recess at this point. You know my instructions, so they're going to be the same. Don't talk about this case. Don't do any research about this case. Don't listen to anything about it. Don't read anything about it. Have a nice break, and we'll have you come back here about 2 o'clock. Okay?
Court, all rise. All rise, please. Good. Close the notebooks, place them on your chairs. This way, please.
All right, Doc, you may step down. All right. Anything we need to address before 2 o'clock? All right. So we'll be in recess till approximately 2 o'clock.